Welcome everyone. Today we have our another new episode, and this episode is very important because we will discuss on CO2 emissions. Already you know that World Talent Economy Forum as a global think tank in Malaysia and Asia Pacific, we are working with the climate change division in Malaysian government, and we also developing blueprint uh, uh, from for Malaysia, and we will join in the Dubai Expo. And already all of the government bodies in the Asia Pacific, the corporations like Petronas and CMEC, XD, even different NGOs and think tank, they are observing World Talent Economy Forum. Beside that, uh, even today, our another partners, Green Caucus from Asia Pacific, they do excellent write up on World Talent Economy Forum. Beside that, many media, electronic media and print media, they are publishing our news. So I want to give special thanks to our all of the speakers, board of advisors, our fellows, and those who supporting World Talent Economy Forums. And we want to develop more open dialogues, and definitely we want to do more practical projects, and already we are starting like that. And we have our world famous speaker for today's discussions, Mr. Sharidan. Thank you. After a long time you join in World Talent Economy Forums. People actually big fan of your discussions. Beside that, we have our famous speaker, Professor David Smith, Mr. Dan, Professor Donalds, Mr. James, Mr. Raja, and Mr. Hardik from India. So I want to start from Professor Sharidan Tatsuno, how you want to analyze today's topic, especially when we discuss on CO2 emissions. Malaysian government and Asia Pacific, they are really concerned about climate change, and they are developing more public-private partnerships on climate change related projects, and we are very serious to solve this problem. So what is your concern, how you want to analyze, what type of innovative idea you want to share with our audience?
Okay, very good. Well, welcome everybody to San Francisco. I'm an urban planner, a serial entrepreneur, and a writer by background. I worked at Stanford and a Swedish business school, so I've been in academia, but I'm not an academic. I'm more of a professional. I tend to do hands-on projects, can do urban planning, Bechtel, mega projects, in energy, 40 years ago, and international financing. So my comments tend toward the pragmatic, the specific, because I believe that we need to move beyond, kind of ideology and grand philosophies and to focus on doable things. So today I'll focus on one thing that is doable. I co-founded a website you can go to. It's called virtualgaia.com. And it is being created by a fellow named Archie Castnet. He's a naturalist. He has about a network of about 40 or 50 naturalists around the world in various areas. And he is at Regenerate.is in Boston. Archie came to me during this social impact groups in San Francisco 5 years ago. We were brainstorming. I was working with a virtual reality company in Sweden called onereality.com. And we were using virtual reality to design sustainable cities of the future. And they brought me in because I was an urban planner. So we did the Copenhagen Port in virtual reality. We did the Loon 2070 plan. We took it off of the 2D pictures and created the 3D future so all the citizens and politicians could see it. We did a new community of 50,000 people in Stockholm. And we did, Malmo, right across the strait from Copenhagen. And what we did, for those of you who know, the virtuality is pretty powerful machines. They're gaming engines, but we used it for real world purposes. So we were using it for sustainable city planning. Our team had been working in VR for 20 years, since the early 90s, when they used $1 million machines, mainframes, and $100,000 headsets. They came from the world's leading environmental engineering company, Sweco. So as you know, Sweden is probably 30 or 40 years ahead of the United States in sustainability thinking and actual planning. So that's the background. So what we did is I took the experiences from our virtuality in Sweden, practical hands-on things, based on 20 years of experience using VR for sustainable cities. But what we only had was the visualization in 3D. So what we needed was the data, because you can't, unless you can measure, you can't prove anything. And I'm an urban planner, and I'm a data junkie. I love data. And one of the problems in all these world forums on climate is that they have great ambitions, goals, but they have no metrics, no KPIs or key performance indicators, and nor do they have data to prove anything. And so we're flying blind. So one of the thoughts we had in Virtual Gaia is to bring data which can be visualized to the globe. So if you go to Virtual Gaia, it's very much like Google Earth, except we don't rely on Google, because Google, as you know, you can't do for making money. You can't do things. The customer service is non-existent. And so we picked our own 3D globe, a virtual globe. So we control everything on the platform. What we're doing is we're testing it in Costa Rica for training eco-village designers and planners right now to see how it works. Our development team's in Mexico City. So we're very international. And the point of the virtual Gaia is to show all data. We have all NASA data and NOAA data streaming in on the virtual reality. We could see 2D, and if you want, you could do 3D. It will also allow people to update the local data using IoT sensors, scanners, any kind of databases. And the goal is to be able to enable you to see all data. The simple one would be carbon. That's a no-brainer. In fact, 5 years ago, 2 students in Paris got all the data from the European countries and in international agencies and showed all the carbon buildup over cities in Europe, in density, in severity, from light to dark orange. So they did that 5 years ago. We said, oh, we could do that. So we did that, on ours. So you could show carbon, but it also shows all the NASA data, the climate data. So you could actually see that. What we wanted to do is go 3D, because in most cities, you can't really understand it unless you look at it in 3D. So we wanted to do that. And so we have the set now, the basic data with NOAA for the oceans, the coastal areas, and the watersheds for NASA. So what you could do is basically look at the city rural interface, because that's critical. We think in bioregions, watersheds primarily. So for example, Mexico, we're talking to, they have 9 major bioregions that we're looking at, and everything designed. In urban planning, we tend to design around bioregions, in particular because of the climate change. Drought is going to be a big issue, or flooding. So we need to redesign. For example, this be very specific. All the cities are designed wrong around the world. They have to be totally redesigned. And the reason why I say that is that our goal over the last 50 years was to get water off the city streets into the channels and into the river and into the ocean as fast as we can. Unfortunately, what happens is we mix all of our garbage and sewage and everything with our runoff, and we try to get it off the city. So when we deplete the oceans, we deplete the aquifers, and we lose all the water. So what we need to do is totally redesign the world, all cities, everything, where your goal is to capture all the water in any form you can and put it into the aquifer so you don't have droughts. Now, that's not an easy task, because that means all concrete for surfaces, for example, you get permeable concrete surfaces. You have to do, well, now they're doing cities where it sinks through the concrete, so it goes right in, not off the street. And you have swales to capture, along rivers. Curitiba, for example, showed how you could capture the water and then save it for the aquifer, and build water parks and increase the value of your city, as well as the beauty with parks and things like that. So what I'm saying is that that's just one specific example of climate change to prevent flooding and disasters. And you can do that now. So one of the ideas is virtual Gaia. We could show all the watersheds. You can design everything around your natural flows and the vegetation, and then test different types of vegetation you plant, native plants or trees or whatever. And then over time, using metrics, if you have the IoT sensors, or satellite data, you can measure the water retention, moisture, everything. So it's very concrete, and you can actually see it. And so we're going to be testing the different climate actions on different specific cities. Now that's just for the city planning at the local level. The other one is for supply chains. So, for example, one of the goals in right now among the investors, SoCap investors, is to estimate the total carbon footprint of your supply chain, everything. Now we can do it visually, so we could show anything. If you get the data from the company, where the products come from, and then you can show the flow to the factory to this, and then you begin to measure what the carbon footprint, and then you redesign the whole flow or eliminate steps. So that's just beginning. It's part of the whole carbon market. Green market that's emerging. China's doing it now, is trying to figure out how do you reduce your carbon for the same product delivery or shipment, right? And it also means substituting products for, like, data services. So wherever you could take moving atoms around, basically, and use more efficient digital solutions. That's another way of looking at it. So you can do that. And then the other one that we're looking at is we have entertainment involved. So we have partnerships with Los Angeles and musicians. And one of the things that raising money, obviously, is among many people, well, probably 60, 70% of Americans, for example, support climate action. They just don't know how to do it. So one simple way, obviously, is to do fundraisers, because unless you have money, you can't do anything. And so what we're doing is you could, with Virtual Gaia, we have, like the Fortnite, they have the musical concerts and dancing, whatever you want in VR. It could be 2D or 3D, doesn't matter. But you can do fundraisers like for any specific town, city, or the world. And I think that is going to be one way of engaging the public, because unless we engage everybody and tie it to specific corporations, for example, a company showing a supply chain and then showing how they could help educate young, children in STEAM education, and then get the funding to pay people to actually act around the projects on, say, a watershed. You're not going to get any action because governments don't have the money; they're too slow, and it just takes forever. So one opportunity, and I tend to be a business-driven person because businesses create most of the carbon footprints, and so instead of blaming citizens, we need to look at corporate responsibility and say, what can you do, like supply chains specifically, because that's holistic. What can you do collectively with all your business partners? So take anything like Nike, or GM, they have thousands of suppliers all over the world. It's a huge supply chain. How you could literally visualize the whole supply chain, and you click on it and you can see how the rubber comes in or whatever. But nobody does that right now, and they don't use metrics, and they don't measure it, they don't show it, they don't report. So how would you prove anything nowadays? So I think that's the challenge. We have the tools. That's not the problem. We just lack the political will. We lack the frameworks. We lack like I'm talking to friends who are doing cyclical economy, and they have the theoretical, and right now they're trying to develop the KPIs in Europe for each city. How do you take the 17 SDGs, translate them into specific KPIs? How do you set it up? How do you do anything? And that's where we are right now, and we only have 10 years to actually, well, it's actually beyond turning point now, I think, but we don't have 25 years to develop these systems. We have to do it yesterday. So I think that's as an urban planner, and I worked on a major project at Bechtel, big energy projects, and I helped contribute to it because it was all fossil fuels back then. So I realized that it is not simple. We designed whole cities like Jubail, 100 projects going 50 years, and our planning back then, well, actually, for any city, we plan out 100 to 250 years. Right? So, and the reason's simple, is that when you put in a stadium or highway or a university, you don't rip it out in 2 years, right? It's going to be there for at least 100 years, hopefully, and preferably longer, because it's a very, very, very high sunk cost. We're talking tens or hundreds of billions of dollars of business and everything that relies on the infrastructure. So when you think infrastructure, and in the past it was physical, like concrete and steel, now we have to think of environmental, the ecosystem. How do we design that? How do we design with nature? And how do we rewild or reforest and not over nature? I mean, California is a good example. I mean, there's a philosophy, we always joke, but in they accuse the Californians of being tree huggers. If it's green, hug it and don't cut it. And unfortunately, it causes a rise in property values because there's less buildable land. And Sweden's just like that. It's a whole nation, tree huggers, I call them. And they have the land, they could do it. In Los Angeles, I work with developers there and housing and on. There's land, pave it. And so, everything's just paved over. And it's a totally different ethos where, that's kind of the West, is that if it's there, pave it, build it, develop it, and then we'll worry about the impacts later. Or, we do an impact report to solve our conscience. But that's totally backwards. So one of the opportunities, and I'm watching, I don't know much about it, in the indigenous peoples around the world, I think can provide a solution. And the reason is that they're more I call them the tree huggers, like California, Northern California, and the Swedes. They are not the pave it people. And then that which has caused our carbon disasters and our climate and watershed disasters. And so I think if we are wise, we go back to the indigenous peoples and work with people who appreciate them. And say, how do you take a naturalist, environmental friendly design or live with nature lightly on the earth? How do you take that from small groups of people to 7 billion people on this earth? Because the indigenous people are good, but they have small villages, so that's easy to do. But how do you do it when you have like Mumbai or New York City? So I think that's the hardest problem ever, is how do you take those ideas and then merge it with the Western thinking to develop new thoughts, how do you basically save the earth in a nutshell? And now, one of the advantages we have, and I'm not a pessimist, and here's why. Cities consume, this is the key data point, cities consume about 80% of all energy, right?
Mhm.
And they emit 75% of all carbon. Now, and more importantly, they are energy buyers, not producers. Therefore, we will win or lose the carbon and climate battle in the cities over the next 10 years. And the reason is that, and I did a thought experiment, but I think most city mayors and others have done it, but they're a little bit, they don't want to talk about it. If, for example, we did this at Bechtel all the time. We did, when OPEC came, we saw the OPEC cartel. I said, wait a minute, if the city, the UN cities, 100 cities, said tomorrow, we announced together that all of us are moving 100% to renewable energy by 2030. And insulation, green design, batteries, EV. What would happen to the stock markets?
Mhm.
And one of the concerns I have, obviously, is like France with the yellow vests. You will literally have, just like COVID, whole sectors of the economy depend on fossil fuel, which is to everybody, collapsing overnight, and massive unemployment, just like, So that's one of the reasons why you can't do it immediately, because the social economic impact would be too big. So then how do you do it gently, when you're in a race for time, and how do you organize it? Now, the cities are fortunately not hostage to the fossil fuels, because they don't usually get funded by them, whereas the national leadership, like in Russia, China, everywhere, they're dependent on fossil fuel industry donations and campaigns and revolving door. So they're basically compromised, because they can't do it. But the cities are more responsive to the citizens. So theoretically, as the Green showed it, if you organize all the citizens, they could force out all the mayors and councils and automatically turn any city overnight to a green city, and stop, and as a policy, reverse it literally overnight if they wanted to. And we saw it already in Europe. So it's not, and one of the differences is that cities are accountable to the people, whereas national governments is almost impossible, because it's driven by the elite, headed by the corporations, And it's almost impossible for an average citizen to make a dent in any national government. And so that's one thing we learned at Bechtel, is that national governments, they just top down, they make any decision, and everybody has to live with it, whether they like it or not. And it's not democratic at all usually. So, I'm trying to figure out, how do you do it can't be all bottom up, citizens only. My Greta's good, but she's not a scientist. She's not an engineer. And all these young people, they don't know that much about science engineering. So, but they want to save the earth, but it's good intentions, but I'm sorry, good intentions don't work. So how do you combine the two with the experts on the top in a national level with the citizen participation at the bottom? And that's the hard problem. I mean, it's policy, really, more than the technology. Because I'm in Silicon Valley, I can tell you, technology is just a tool. You could use technology for good or evil. Well, that's the big debate over ethical AI right now. We can create drones that kill people automatically, or we could create drones that help save the planet, by watershed things. I mean, so it's really not the tools so much. It's really where are we as a species? Do we believe in saving our Earth? Do we believe in helping and being equitable and inclusive, or do we want to just destroy everything in a massive, but almost like a world war? It's a climate war in that sense, where you don't, as the pandemic taught us, we don't even need to kill each other with drones and all that. We could just let nature do it, which is what's happening now. In fact, and from an urban planning point of view, a climate disaster is the results of poor environmental management. And it's no different than losing a patient because you don't have medical treatment, because you haven't planned for it. You plan for increasing deaths. So I'm Christian, and I tend to be rather moralistic about that. To be passive in the face of massive death, and that your policy is, I'm sorry, that's close to murder to me in my mind. It's like a war, and personally, I think all of us are positioned in different ways is to say, how do we reverse all this? How do we save lives, human lives, and then how do we save the planet, and how do we make an ecosystem? So I wrote a book actually called Divinely San Francisco. It's based on was Dante's Divine Comedy. And if you study that, actually, that's one of the best, and urban planners do that. So it starts in hell or in infernal, which is what we have now, climate dystopias and disasters. And it goes to purgatory, which is the political process, policymaking design, and you get battles between, and then you hopefully end up in what we call ecotopias or paradise. So Dante showed the roadmap. And the challenge we have is, and I wrote about it in a novel series in my website, you'll see it at dreamscapeglobal.com, but we have the tools to do anything. So it's the question is, what do we want to do? I mean, how do we want to do it? So I tend to be very optimistic. And here's why. I listen to the Africans because the Africans are really wise people. And they always tell me, they go, Sheridan, one thing you must learn from us. And I said, what is it? To go fast, go alone. To go far, go together. And I used to think, okay, that's cool. It's like a nice slogan, And I thought about it, and I said, these people are really wise, and here's why. If you were a warrior in the plains of Africa and you went fast on your own, you wouldn't get very far until the lions got you. And the Africans learned a long time ago that if they went together in tribes and they taught each other, and the storytellers were their scientists, what to do, what not to do, how to survive in the jungle or the forest. If you listened to the wise elders who knew what they were talking about, you would survive. And the others were deselected from the gene pool. And that's why the Africans always tell me that. And I used to think about it all that, and I said, I understand. That is human evolution. You're discussing out of Africa how we came to be who we are. Now, that was easier when we had unlimited resources, but now we have a finite world. So the question is, are we wise enough, like the Africans were, learn to adapt to our environment and try to run instead of trying to run over it, or will we be eaten by the lion, so to speak, and basically deselect ourselves from the earth? And that's, I think, in a nutshell, where we are. And so, and but I tend to be optimistic because if you look at the Africans who survived, they learned that humans can gain wisdom and knowledge, not just based on theory and faith and all that, but actual harsh experience, which is called science today. Um, and I think that we can learn just like the Africans did, and they were successful. And if you just look at human evolution, I think we will see will give us ideas on how people can survive, given adverse conditions and stuff. I in that sense, I think it's bad, but could be worse. But on the other hand, humans aren't totally insensitive and dumb. We have hopefully some wisdom, and we work together as teams. And if we do that, we can survive like the Africans did.
Thank you, Professor Sheridan. Professor David Smith, we are discussing on climate change. Thank you, Dr. Sheridan. Professor Sheridan, actually, you bring very important point for us. Yes, climate change is real. I just want to share my personal experience because every day I try to visit at least the remote area in Malaysia, and like 4 or 5 kilometers I run, I discuss with the local people. The reality is that, especially in the grassroots level people, like World Talent Economy Forum, this is our target. I think that our policymakers, government and corporation, we need to be more careful about them, because if we cannot create more awareness for these grassroots level people, ultimately all of our initiative and objective will not be successful. So we need to engage. Hardly 90 like 10% of the corporations in Malaysia example, or in the Asia Pacific even, only maximum 10%, maybe Malaysia Sunway Group, they are concerned about climate change and they are taking necessary initiative. But I think as a climate change activist like you and all of the people, those who are concerned about climate change, we need to work hard and we need to get involved with this grassroots level people. This is very, very, very important. Still they do not know. Still they do not know what is the procedure. They do not know what they have to do. The big countries, the big corporation, they come and they are in the city, but they do not engage with these grassroots level people. We have to be very much careful about them. Professor David Smith, I know you have excellent analysis and point of view about climate change. So what are the three main causes of CO2 emissions?
Well, if you look at climate change, it's a big bucket of multiple reasons causing it. And CO2 emissions is one part of that bucket. And it's actually the primary greenhouse gas that is emitted from human activities. If you look in the United States, for example, back in 2019, about 80% of all U.S. greenhouse emissions came from CO2. So it's a leading indicator there. Your question was, what are some of the leading producers of that? Transportation tends to be the leading producer of that. And if I look at just the United States, transportation accounted for about 35% of the greenhouse gases back in 2019. Electricity production was the next one after that, particularly here in the United States. A lot of our electricity is generated from coal and hydrocarbons producing it. And the third one on that is really industry. And industry, those are the top three, at least here in North America. And beginning to go after that, you have others, though. But what's interesting to look at some of the numbers in the United States, we kind of peaked with some of our carbon dioxide emissions back in the around 2007, 2008, and have been reducing them since then. Some of the ways we've been doing it is through energy efficiency, energy conservation. We've been switching fuels in a pretty great way. We've changed some of our land use and land management practices, and we've looked at ways to capture carbon and do it. The next leading gas, though, after CO2 happens to be methane. And methane is really driven a lot by agriculture, energy and industry, and really waste from homes and businesses that give it. And those are the top two gases that really are affecting the greenhouse emissions. But one of the other interesting things that I was really surprised, and to me, is it's one of the few good things about COVID, is if I go back and look last year, the global CO2 emissions declined by 5.8%. Why? Because so much of the world shut down. And if we go back and look at what the leading drivers are of CO2 emission, COVID really slowed those down. We did not drive as much. We didn't do the other elements as much. And we saw, like I said, a 5.8% reduction in CO2 emissions. And I think that's significant, showing that even though we have intense challenges ahead of us as we're trying to solve, particularly the CO2 part of the greenhouse gas emissions, is you really think it's there. Um, if I look at the overall greenhouse gas and look at some of the things that we are beginning to talk about, um, you talk about the biosphere, and Dan's put something up about the biosphere. The biosphere is more impacted by the methane and some of the other gases that make up the greenhouse gases than just CO2. And we're really seeing it there, but man is the leading driver of CO2 emission. And man has to step up and do it. And Sheridan did a great job of laying those elements out. And as you look at them, and some of the studies are very interesting. Sheridan mentioned Curitiba. Curitiba is a great little city in Brazil that if you begin to look at how they're beginning to deal with it. But you move down the road not far from them to San Jose de Campos, where Embraer is headquartered, and they've really taken steps to change their manufacturing process. You look at Petrobras there, and as a petroleum company, what they're doing in this space, it's really mind-boggling to how they've stepped up to the task in Brazil. And we need to do the same thing globally to have an impact here. The other beginning element there is that if we look at the global coal use, it's anticipated to rebound this year. And looking at that, there is a study out which is called Our World in Data, and on the CO2 emissions. It's just fantastic figures on it. And if you begin to look particularly at CO2 numbers, Asia by far is the leader with 19 billion tons of CO2, which is about 53% of the global emissions. North America comes in actually a pretty distant second with 6.5 billion tons of CO2, which is 18%. And Europe is really third in there with 6.1 billion tons, which is 17%. And then you really go down after that. So you can really see that the top three regions are the ones that can have the most impact. And Asia actually is the one where the majority of the impact is needed to make a quick reduction in CO2 and to be able to begin to reverse the trend even longer on greenhouse gas than just the blimp that came out because of the shutdowns around COVID. So I hope that kind of sets some numbers in place.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, thank you. We have our speakers from India, Mr. Hardik and Raja, because I think for climate change, India, Bangladesh, Maldives, they will be highly affected for climate change. So, what type of initiative actually Indian government or your corporations or the local NGOs they are taking for reducing this carbon CO2? So, Mr. Hardik.
Yes, thank you. So, can you hear me properly? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. So, uh, the approach, the first thing is approach. Fundamentally, of course, CO2 is required to keep our environment running. So, it's not a bad guess. That's number one. uh, Obviously it's an excessive quantity which we have produced, which is wrong. So the balancing act is required. We don't need to make it zero, that's fact, but yeah, we need to make it at a sustainable level. So there are a lot of activities which are required and we are doing. One is forestation. So it's a natural way of consuming the carbon dioxide. So there are a lot of tree plantation drives happening across. Government is doing a very nice job. In fact, in our city itself, every year there are 10 million trees, kind of a target every municipality is keeping, and with the participation of all citizens across. So even the local authorities are helping growing trees in your house or in your kind of bungalows around your area. So those kind of initiatives are obviously a natural way of reducing the CO2. The second is artificial or other non-natural way is how we can educate people to change their consuming behavior to products which are less of CO2 emission making. So if we divert that to less CO2 emission making products, automatically the businesses who are making sustainable products, those will strive, and the CO2 emission, the products which are being made by higher CO2 emission brands, they definitely will go down, and brands will have to definitely look at their production facilities or techniques or how they, but because the demand will drive the whole manufacturing. So as demand of a consumer is much more important for any manufacturing facility to continue the production. Currently we have developed one terminology, we call it ESV, environmental saving value, for which we have got India patent. We have developed a technique and a software through which we can arrive at environmental saving value. That we have five parameters. One is a tree saving, second is a carbon dioxide saving, third is a land pollution, water pollution, and air pollution savings. So before buying a product, consumer can actually see that how much this product is saving this many number of carbon dioxide or this many number of trees. So that's a big awareness. Every person will know that what positive impact by buying that product they are making, and that way they would change their lifestyle consumption to carbon dioxide or greenhouse gas saving products. And the other way around, what we are helping is overall we are using some available statistics to arrive at a per capita number of savings needed. So to achieve a target of 1.5 degrees, how much CO2 or how many kgs of CO2 needs to be saved by a person, with a simple calculation of dividing it by the 7 billion people of the world, then every person will come to a target of that much savings. And then we give them the options that, okay, if you want to change your lifestyle, these are the ways you can reduce your CO2 emissions, which includes your solar, EV products. And those kind of awareness also is helping consumers to adopt those options. So at their level, whatever they can do, they are doing. We have seen a very good numbers in terms of like solar in our city or in our overall India wise. The solar has picked up very well. Now the next target is EV, where government also doing great. They are also promoting and giving subsidies for EV vehicles, and also having a lot of strategies around increasing the price of fossil fuel. They are not reducing, and they are making sure that people move to an alternate source. So those are the strategic ones which government is also helping. So I personally feel each and every person on this planet will have to join this, and they will have to find out how they can individually contribute to this. But personally, there are a lot of solutions. Only people needs we need to reach out with awareness to them, and we need to give them access of those solutions. So if those solutions can reach out to those people, and the government can do subsidies or help them adopt those faster, I think we can very well do good progress, and the future can be really bright. So that's what I think.
Thank you. Mr. Raja, what is your perception regarding climate change? And being that we are observing SARC, previously it's not successful anymore as a regional hub. But now even India, they are playing a leading role in South Asia, and South Asia has a lot of challenges for climate change. And so, what is the role the like Indian government taking right now, and how we can work together, especially in South Asia?
Wonderful so far at Professor Sheldon, David, and Harry Shaw. I had the opportunity of going around the forest, 1972, 74, 2 years. Each and every forest in the deciduous, semi-deciduous, evergreen forest in the state of Mysore. It was a very interesting time that I had. We used to do a lot of logging, etc., and it was a nice one. Also in Assam, I had been there, and I live in a place called Kodaikanal. It is about 8,000 feet above the sea level. It has a wonderful place with a good lake and a very good forest, and people are very much keen. For example, plastics had been banned for several years now. I am the author of a book called Corporate Citizenship and Sustainability, in terms of measuring intangible, fiscal, and ethical assets. The two words which I would like to talk about is intangible and ethical assets. When Professor Sheldon had a mention about more than 7 billion people, if you look at that carbon emission, as I had described very much on causality, on diesel emission of Volkswagen. It was a major problem. More than $35 billion had been wasted, actually. It was a big affair. Now, we got to do the intangible. When he said 7 billion people, Professor Sheldon, mind you, is only 7 billion people. When we look at that, I call it as Project SEED, there is social, environmental, economic development, 17 SDGs, is infinite. When we try to manage the operations, and each on a different type of people are doing it, you are not able to control what exactly the targets and what we have achieved. And invariably it is ex post facto. When the flood comes, when CO2 emission had a lot of problem, we are able to think in terms of ex post facto. So what I would rather say, these are all the CO2 emission is an ethical asset. if you have created. So you got to have a target. If you have a 2030 target, you got to get that through to today's CAGR, to CDGR. That is, pick up the CAGR and bring it down to today's level and distribute to individuals. That is the return on intangible. The intangible is a powerhouse, is energy base. There are only three laws: matter, which is energized matter, which has been energized by individual effort. The second law is the matter, which is waiting to happen. There's no energy being done. If you look at the CO2 emission points, we are not able to, some of the things are not being done. It cannot do of its own. It has been done by the individual. That is the third law. That is the energy factor. That is the effort. So what I call is the EPP, effort per person. The return of intangible, numerator is action or inaction, and denominator is intangible. So you have an intangible is a power, or the energy is a common factor for every individual, you or I, for all the 7 billion people. So if we allocate the information to, or the target to individuals, and thereby they create quite a number of other individuals to take care of it, in reaching the targets, we are in a position to find out the index of inactivity. That is my IPR, inactivity-based cost management. Activity as a cost incidence. That is what we report in the balance sheet. That is what post facto we are talking about CO2 emission. Whereas inactivity has got a cost consequence. Measure cost consequence now. It's very important. If we are allotted, if I am given a particular target of 2030, and what I was supposed to do is like, if you know about cricket, you have a target to reach. What is the run rate? If a run rate of CDGR, daily growth rate, what am I going to achieve is visible today itself. That is the cost consequence. If I forget about it, not doing it, then CAGR target will not be reachable. So you got to do an elaborate thing, and this is what I have indicated in my book, and I can share with you further information on that. And it is feasible. Return on intangible is one of the finest thing. Even a couple of days back, I have posted in LinkedIn quite a number of response, very good response from KPMG and other people. It's a Project SEED is a major one. 9 social, 4 economic, 4 environmental development goals. How we are going to reach every one of them? So CO2 emission is one of the 17 SDGs. Let us not go to the individual object. That is, individuals who are doing it, I mean, various places is being done. We are not able to collect that information. If you are able to do that, which is return on intangible is done, entrusted to an individual, you have a powerhouse of information available. Database, which Professor Sheldon had been mentioning about it, and the cities and other things and all that. In GNH, GDP, which I have covered in the same EPP, that is effort per person. It is feasible. Accountability is very much needed. That is feasible only by return on intangible, not by return on investment. The return on investment is different. We try to invest a lot, and I covered it in a different fashion. So my emphasis, return on intangible, effort per person. We can discuss at length at a later date. Thank you.
I think we've lost Sharif.
Have you got? Am I?
Activate the backup.
Hello. Did you hear me? I was just talking.
Yeah,
we heard you fine. Yeah,
Sharif's
I think
internet
we've lost Sharif.
apparently dropped out, but
we.
Do you want to go
Go
next,
on.
Dan? Or
The whole host is missing, is it?
The host is missing. Yes.
Okay. Did you all hear me? And I've been.
Yes, we did, and you were wonderful. You were wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Sharif's back now.
I would very much
Thank you.
interested in Professor Sheldon is talking about the database, etc. And I have a lot of information about how database is very bad all over the world, how very not collated, particularly if you collect on the GDP level, and as well as GNHS, gross national happiness index level. These two are not being combined, very much delayed. A lot of work has to be done. That is possible by return on intangible. That's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Dempsey.
Thank you,
Sharif. It's a wonderful show. I'm pleased to be on it, to share my thoughts. And I showed you my blank notebook at the beginning, and now I think you can see that I made extensive notes. So I appreciate everyone's contributions. And this is a very, very serious subject, but I can't help but use some humor here, because otherwise I'll burst into tears. You know, I heard the 3 laws, and I'm going to raise 4 noble truths, because I think we need some spiritual guidance here, along with the economic, political, and social imagery that we've been talking about, because we really need to build a post-capitalist society. The pros of capitalism have been thrown in our face day after day after day. Yet we're talking about what are the downsides of capitalism, the downsides of economic growth unchecked, the downsides of living for yourself and not caring about the impact of others. When I was younger, much younger than today, I remember rivers catching fire. And you know, water boils, it does not burn. So what was burning was the man-made waste. And it wasn't until then that we stopped pouring pollution into our rivers. We kind of woke up, but then we forgot. And we treated the air as this inexhaustible resource as well. And we're treating the oceans as this inexhaustible resource as well, just the way we treated these big rivers in the past. But they're not inexhaustible. We have islands of plastic in the oceans, and we have air that is becoming less and less breathable. You know, speaking in Northern California, the wildfire situation here has made some of the air toxic to breathe. So this is, again, no joking matter, but that's not going to stop me from telling jokes. The idea that we're talking about, what is in terms of why are we trying to live at all? This is a spiritual question. Why are we trying? We want people to live lives of quiet dignity, and to have as many of them be able to do so as possible, not to make one so rich that he can fly off into space. That is not the goal of our society. Our goal is to care for the most, the best. And if this is our goal, then how do we stop polluting the air? Because it will become unbreathable. And now we talked a little bit, Sheridan talked a little bit about village elders. You know, that was such a great system. Unfortunately, that's not the environment we're in today, because the village elders were talking about the same environment they lived in as the young growing up that day. And, you know, they could be a brave when they were young, and they could be a chief when they were older, and then a village elder when they were older still. And so that was a way that could live for centuries, and evolution had a way of taking over. But the rate of change now is accelerated beyond our wildest imaginations of the past. And it's continuing like a hockey stick. It's going like this. And so the pace of change is accelerated, so that, you know, I can't tell my niece how to use her iPhone and what apps are good. You know, she knows her iPhone better than I know mine. That's for sure. So my years of experience working in computer science has no meaning to her in her life. So this rate of change is affecting us so that she thinks I'm an old fuddy-duddy. You know, she doesn't think I'm a village elder. And she's right. I don't know her world. That's one generation. So this is the thing that I wanted to start with. You know, the fact that the pace of change is so accelerating. The things that are occurring to us are happening so fast, and we are slow to adapt. And evolution doesn't have a chance. Evolution can't We will not grow lungs that can breathe the new air fast enough. We will not evolve in time. So we do have to rely on some technology, and science and technology has to be more respected in our society. There's no question about that. Yet we have a senator going up not too long ago, holding a snowball up and denying climate change. A snowball. You know, and you want to reach through the screen and grab him by the throat and say climate is not weather, but you can't. So, and you have people electing him. People will vote for that person, holding a snowball up and denying climate change. Now we have these climate change deniers. There's not much we're going to be able to do about them because they're stuck. They're stuck where they are. But we also have these people who are saying, well, climate change has always happened. They're not denying climate change, but they're saying it's just part of nature. No, man, since the dawn of the industrial age has accelerated this change. So this climate change is not natural at all. It is man-made. And it's because we are chasing an almighty dollar rather than doing what is best for the most. And if we started to change our thinking, it will change our hearts. And then we will come up with the technological solutions, and we will have, as Sheridan pointed out, we have the technology, we don't have the will. So this is what I'm talking about. We need to change our minds and our hearts to change our will, to get the willpower, to implement the changes that are necessary. Maybe we shouldn't think about Vancouver as part of Canada and Portland as part of the United States. Think of it as a regional basis because they're affected as a region. You know, when the drought hits in the West, it's affecting a region. It's not just affecting the West. When there's massive downpour of rain in places that didn't get massive downpours of rain like they're getting now, you know, and there's drought just in another region, you can't put the same policy in place in both places. Now, maybe you can, instead of piping oil across countries, you can pipe water. Maybe that's a potential solution. But you know, there are brighter minds than mine that can apply the technologies as they are appropriate. And once we get the will to do this, to act as if we were in this together, which we are, then at that point in time, we will be able to implement the changes that is necessary. But until then, we will be pointing fingers at each other and blaming. Now, our society is immature. It's not as advanced as we think, because we have elected people who, you don't have to be a Freud to figure out this guy is mentally ill, and 70 million people voted to put him back into power. Are we out of our minds? No, we're immature. We're children. We're childish. We need to grow up, take responsibility, not just responsibility for our own lives, but for the generation that follows and the generation after that. And start thinking about someone besides yourself. Think about this as we're all in this together, so think about others as well as yourself. It's not how many cars you have that matters anymore. But I always say this, start with yourself. What can you change about yourself? You know, there are a lot of things. You can drive less, you can fly less, you can have energy efficient appliances. If you have a home, you can have a solar panel in your home. You can drive a non-fossil fuel car now. These are all possibilities. And if one person does a lot, it won't really matter. But if a lot of people do a little, it will matter. So start with yourself and influence those in your sphere of influence. Get them to change their behaviors just a little. Just change their behaviors a little bit. You don't have to be a pest. You don't have to be obnoxious about it, but lead by example. Inspire others to make the necessary changes in their lives. And if you change yourself and change those in your sphere of influence, and they change those in theirs, you know, this can keep growing. So we are talking about a bottom-up phenomena, but we also have to throw the bums out of these political power. The people who are holding a snowball up, do not vote for them. Vote for somebody that is telling you the truth. And this is another problem in our society now. Our sources of information are questionable at best. People are trying to persuade, not to inform. And if you're telling people what they want to hear, they will tune in. And then you get ratings, and then you will get money, and you will get sponsorship. So yes, this dark money is behind a lot of our problems. There's no question about that. And a great economists like Milton Friedman thought that, you know, this would be okay. The courts will sort out whatever the problem is. And then we have a court decision like Citizens United, which, if you don't know, basically says corporations are people, and you can, you know, you can't get in the way of them funneling their money, their fossil fuel money to a politician. And so now we have politicians that are beholden to the fossil fuel industry. So good luck kicking those guys out. There's a lot of money behind them, and we have a hard time kicking them out. So our political system is in a standstill right now. And all we're doing is pointing fingers at each other and blaming each other. And it's very difficult to get anything done. So you do have to have some ground up activity, but keep your eye on the ball, because what you want to do is form alliances, cooperate, collaborate, rather than compete, and form them on a local basis first, a regional basis second, and then who knows where you can stop. Maybe it becomes a national movement. Who knows? Don't give up on yourself. Don't give in to despair, but start with yourself. Change what you can, and then we'll see what happens. Thanks very much, Sharif. Terrific show.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Professor Donald. Unmute, please.
Well, back to the subject of carbon dioxide, it's interesting to make some contrasts, because when you're looking at the developing world, it's important to realize that if you're somebody in the developing world and you're looking at places like the United States and Europe, where everybody has clean water and flush toilets and electrical power in their houses and computers and televisions and all those kinds of things, and you know, you're one of those people who are basically food insecure, living on $1 a day and things like that, it's very, 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 very desirable to want to get from where you are to the more desirable lifestyle that's healthier, that's more just better, and a lot of, at least perceived as better. I mean, it turns out that when you actually do studies of happiness, people in the slums of Bangladesh are as happy as people in the suburbs of Boston, because happiness doesn't necessarily come from material things, because they have strong family, strong community, and things like that. It would be nice if we measured, we could start measuring things, as I've said before, in something besides gross national product. But it's interesting to look at the world in general, and California in the United States is doing a fairly good job, and it's been reducing the amount of greenhouse gases, especially carbon dioxide, that it's using. It's kind of a not completely, it's a little bit of a two-edged sword, because we're reducing the amount of carbon dioxide we're using by switching from coal, which we don't use at all in California, just none. There are no coal-fired plants whatsoever, whereas there's still quite a few of them on the East Coast, though they're closing down a lot of those. We use natural gas instead. Natural gas is methane. And so when you're drilling for natural gas, it's very possible that it escapes. And methane is a more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. So we're not, completely being environmental by doing that. We're building a lot of solar and a lot of wind, and solar and wind produce electric power. And to the degree that we can create electric power by using solar and wind, we can reduce our reliance on greenhouse gases. By far, the biggest source of greenhouse gases in California is transportation. And as California was developed intentionally, and it was kind of wasn't anybody doing anything, nefarious, but what wound up happening is that after World War II, people, the oil companies knew, but most people didn't know how damaging the greenhouse gases were. So there was no desire to prevent them, but there was a huge desire. They invented the ranch-style house. Actually, it was invented by a guy named Fritz Burns in Los Angeles, who developed, and then he teamed up with Kaiser in San Jose, and they the whole desire was for everybody to have their own ranch-style house with 3.2 kids and a backyard, and so these huge suburbs developed in San Jose and Los Angeles and places like that, and these were totally car dependent because they were vast sprawling suburbs, and that was replicated in Dallas and all over the country. These vast sprawling suburbs were built, and they're still there. So we're stuck being dependent on cars, and California is especially bad that way. And so if you look at the breakdown of the carbon dioxide in California, every single sector is going down except transportation, which is just a flat, straight line of how much carbon dioxide we're using. And so the goal here in California is to switch to electric cars, and that's mandated. So we are on the way of doing that. I want to point out something about coal and petroleum, basically fossil-based fuels. We blame it all on the oil companies, and we say, oh, these evil oil companies want to make profits. But if you go to a city like Houston, many cities in Texas, for an instance, Oklahoma, others, North Dakota, Bakersfield, California, all these different kinds of places, there's a whole entire communities where everybody makes their living doing this. They've been making their living this for generations doing this. It's not just the oil companies, it's the people who make the drilling devices, it's the people who refine the oil, it's the people who make the pipelines for the oil. It's the economic engine for these places. So when you talk about stopping this, you're not talking just to the evil oil companies. You're talking about the living of these entire communities. And states like North Dakota, if you've ever been there, I actually had a Catholic priest once tell me, he said he had it on good authority that when you died, if you were bad, you went to North Dakota. And so we it's not a very wonderful place to live. It's incredibly cold and stupid antivirus software. So it's completely dependent on oil. And, there's Alberta is another place in Canada. So there's places all over the world where it's critically important. So the how we're going to change this can't just be a matter of just saying that we want to change. Well, in other words, there's a huge amount of inertia, and these people are going to continue to elect people like James Inhofe, the guy with the snowball in Oklahoma, because he is going to protect their livelihoods. That's what he's doing. That's the way they see him. They see him as somebody there that's going to keep their livelihoods. And they're not going to go for alternatives. That's why West Virginia votes for Trump. That's why, because they're very into coal. And just even though coal is dying because all the coal plants are closing in the United States, it's dying, they're able to export coal to other places like China, which is very dependent on coal and is increasing the number of coal plants. So that's something that's very important. And another thing that I think if I remember David brought up, somebody brought up, which is the agriculture. Over half the Earth's surface, habitable surface, is used for agriculture right now. Over half. 1% is used for cities. Cities are amazingly efficient. because as Sheridan pointed out, I looked it up and I put it in a link here. It's about 60% of the carbon dioxide is produced by cities, and they use 75% of the power. So they basically, they're not a, they basically are efficient at converting power. And you can have, it's much easier to have electric transportation and efficient transportation in cities. You go to New York City, to me, when I first visited there, I felt like I was in a Star Trek movie because I could just think about where I wanted to go. And you know, in 15 minutes, I was there just magically. And it was living in California where you have to take forever to get anywhere and drive cars and stuff like that. I thought I was in heaven. So but California and the United States in general is actually net carbon negative. We're actually a carbon sink by the way that we do our agriculture and forest and things. We destroyed our forests at one time, but we've been systematically rebuilding our forests. And United States is a carbon sink. Our agricultural sector absorbs more carbon than it makes. If you go to Malaysia, they have some of the most beautiful rainforests in the world. Something like, I forget, but a quarter of the species in the world live in the Malaysian rainforests. I mean, they are unbelievable. But yeah, 80% of them have been chopped down. So we look at that and we say, oh, the bad Malaysians, but the people that are chopping them down are people who need to eat. They need to make a living. They're the people that want to have television sets and good ways of making a living. So when we're talking about lowering carbon dioxide, wherever we are in the world, we have to completely think about the people that live there, the social factors of the people, and understand how we're going to be able to work with those people, whether it's people that make their living making oil, or there's people that make their living doing agriculture, slash and burn agriculture. Just for grins, what is the #1 crop in the world by far? Sugarcane. And they're clearing the forests of Brazil to grow sugarcane, which is the major source of sugarcane. What is sugarcane used for? Biofuel. And so what winds up happening is it cycles back to transportation. And so from an overall perspective, if you're building from scratch, if you're starting to design things from scratch, you're building new cities, you have some sort of control over what you build. The most important thing that you need to look at is be able to have efficient, low carbon transportation, because that is the #1 problem that we have in the world. Airplanes are minuscule. They're a teeny part of transportation. They're no big deal. And I put a link in it to an article, reference to an article in Science. The article itself is paywalled, but there's an article that summarizes the article. And what it shows is that people talking to each other does influence these situations, whether it's global warming, whether it's the necessity for transportation. No matter what thing changes that we want to make, peer-to-peer relationships, passing knowledge from one person to another, passing your emotional commitment to the things that you're going to want. Sharif is a world-class debater, and he knows as well as anyone else that logic isn't always the thing that wins debates. Sometimes emotion is part of winning a debate. And so you can't convey emotion by articles very easily, but a person can convey their conviction and their emotion to another person. And that's key to making these things happen. And the last thing I'm going to say is that some people think of their governments as something over there. They're as like a person that can act and do things, but they're a person that's separate from you. They're on the other side of a wall and you can't communicate with them, but yet they have power over you. They can make you do things and they can make things happen. But can you see a government? Can you touch a government? Smell it? No, you can't. Governments are in your head. You imagine what the government is, and the government becomes what you imagine. And the people around you agree what the government is. So a government is really an agreement that you have with the people around you, an unconscious agreement that you have. So you really have power over the government. You have the power to create your government. And Dr. Tlaib mentioned that too. He said, Dr. Tlaib is Secretary General of the WTO, and he said that too. He said we need to pressure our governments. We need to create our governments in ways that start making the changes that we need to make. So ultimately, the key is to understand the things that are causing the CO2 problems, which is the biggest is transportation. And then the second thing that we really need to do is realize that we do have the power to make those changes. Thank you, Sharif.
Thank you. Mr. Den.
Well, on the subject of CO2 emissions, I think we need to get some perspective. The real emission that's responsible is a policy emission of granting personhood to non-persons and really setting up an unfair playing field. We have corporate personhood, as James was talking about. Citizens United made money, unlimited free speech for these artificial persons. And what are they given right to do? Okay, they have a duty to maximize shareholder profit. That's their only mission. And doing this in a world where things are not being true value priced. We have natural resources that are being extracted and harvested with no rights whatsoever. So you've got a very unfair playing field where nature is batting last. There is, however, a movement to grant personhood rights to nature, and this would be one start in resolving this. You know, America likes to portray itself as a democratic republic, but it's really a corporate oligarchy, and we have the policy of the U.S. government is basically set by the sum of the corporate lobbyists that are having incredible inside access to the government system. You know, JFK had a great quote. He said, there are 1,000 lobbyists in Washington, D.C. I'm the lobbyist for the American people. And we need to get back to a system where every neighborhood has a lobbyist. Every person is a lobbyist. Everyone, I mean, we have not begun to take advantage of the soft power that is available to individuals and to neighborhoods. I'm talking about economic power, the power to boycott or pro-cott, the power to preferentially create economic opportunities and rewards systems. And we can do this in an amazing way with the digital tools we have. I love the virtualgaia.com that Sheridan is working on and is doing. That's going to be exactly the kind of GIS enabled soft power system that we can put data into. Now, the other thing that's causing this huge addiction to fossil fuel goes back to World War II, because the reason the Allies won against the Axis powers is that they ran out of petroleum products and we didn't. And it really created a post-war agenda that made big oil and the House of Assad and the petrodollar the top of American policy. And you can still see this in the subsidies that come to fossil fuels that amount to something like $600 billion 600 billion with a B every year. And I know a lot of jobs and material suppliers and people are a part of that big oil ecosystem, but it's just going to have to something. I mean, we can wean ourselves off that. For one thing, hydrocarbon chemistry is way too valuable to be combusting. You can make all kinds of amazing plastics and polymers, and carbon chemistry is basically an unlimited soup of possible molecules, and to be just burning that and creating byproducts in the atmosphere is highly irresponsible. Oh, and I'm going to wrap it up because I'm so glad Marshall could make it. He's really doing cutting edge work on this. So I'm going to surrender the floor. Thanks again.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall, joining to World Talent Economy Forum discussion, open dialogue. So, how you want to discuss about CO2 emission?
Okay, well, I just got in part of it, and it sounds more than a discussion about CO2 emissions, although I'm sure politics plays a heavy role in this. But I would prefer, from my perspective, to address the actual implementations that we're seeing that are happening. Some of the implementation is to take different technologies and combining them together. It's not a simple solution that one, like a magic bullet or one vaccine solves the whole thing, right? It's a combination of tools and technologies and probably politics as well as policy issues that will have to address this. I can only speak from what we're doing, and I'm not speaking for anybody else. So our group has been provided a letter of fit with the EU Climate Bond Initiative, which is the regulator for a type of green bond that is in the EU. There are 3 types of green bonds. It's kind of confusing because they call them green bonds, but there is an actual bond market for green bonds. So that causes some confusion. There's also ESG bonds. I'm sure you know what that is. And then there's the climate bonds. So the climate bonds are the only bonds that are monitored by Fitch and Morningstar and others. And the reason for that is because the taxonomy, which are the rules of the road for the bond, are very stringent and prevent greenwashing, which I think part of the politics is about greenwashing. So for carbon CO2 reduction and emissions to be addressed, we need to make sure that we're transparent, that everybody's working on a transparent platform, and that we're going out and making funding that is, from our perspective, is a infrastructure lift. It's not investment capital. It's not family office capital. It's not the X Prize. The X Prize by what's his name? The Tesla guy is $100 million, but you don't get $100 million. You get maybe 5 million. If you're lucky, you might get 20. We're going after a bond that's 500 million euros. That's a huge amount of money, but it's under a certain taxonomy, and there's different taxonomies. The one we're pursuing is the waste management taxonomy, which means we're taking waste or a brownfield entity as defined in Europe as opposed to the United States, and converting it into 100% greenfield entity. You can't be partial. You can't do 95%. You can't do 99%. It has to be 100%, and you have to prove it. And you have to prove it through science, not because you say you do it. So we submitted all that documentation, got our letter of fit, and we're now pursuing the bond. When we get the bond and the money, what we will do is we have formed 7 joint ventures with brownfield operators. Those are landfill operators, waste haulers, or people that have so much waste, they're just burning it or burying it in the ground. And by the way, burying it in the ground is as bad as burning it, because when you bury it in the ground, guess what? You're causing toxicity to the aquifers, and all our potable water on Earth is not on the surface of the Earth. It's in aquifers because the Earth acts as a filtration media. And technology that can take salt water and convert it into potable water, that's possible too. So we're working with different types of technologies to bring that to place. We have 4 fundamental technologies that combine with other technologies and other providers who are interested to joint venture with us. We can solve the CO2 emission issue in a certain way. We're not 100%. We don't claim to be, but we're making every effort to make that happen. The 4 technologies we're deploying is pyrolytic carbon capture and storage, which has been around 80 years. You can't have 10 patents in that specific area because of what we're doing. We're taking both organic and inorganic waste and converting it into a material known as char. And we also create syngas, which can be converted in, which is a GHG emission, by the way, because it has volatile organic compounds, VOCs, and PAH, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, which are, they're not the well-known GHG emissions. We think of CO2, and we also think of methane as the dominant ones, but those are GHG emissions as well. And we have an engine technology, a genset, that can actually convert CO2 and methane and VOCs and PAH and other GHG emissions into energy. And we have 0 emissions to ultra low emissions. And I say that range because it depends on what the feedstock is. So we do know that when we say ultra low, we're talking, if you understand math, it's asymptotic on the curve, meaning it's almost 0. What do I mean by that? Everybody that's on, I don't care where you are on the planet right now, you're breathing a minimum of 400 parts per million of NOx, probably closer to 900 right now, depending on where you are. And that is why we have asthma in children and things like that going on. So the amount of CO2 that we create out of the stack of our genset, or that it emits, is 18 parts per million. That's almost 0. But good news is we even take that 18 parts per million and convert it into products. So we are totally regenerative, cyclical, and that's our approach. We're looking for more joint venture partners to get this done. We've been told that once the first bond comes across, we can form more joint ventures in different other taxonomies. Some of the other taxonomies are agriculture, cargo shipping, and green building. One of the things that we can do is we can take the waste and convert it into a carbon sequestered material that is 30% lighter than reinforced concrete and 100% stronger, and we have patents on that. And that's important for construction in areas where there's earthquakes and things like that. So this is all important stuff that we're doing. We don't claim to be the be-all or end-all. One thing I learned from my own father, who was an inventor, had over 100 patents in his own name, and was the head of the special devices during World War II. He always told me, you don't know what you don't know. Now, what the hell does that mean? I'll tell you what it means when I asked him. And he said, son, it means one thing. It means that everybody thinks they are experts in their field and they know what they're talking about. Guarantee you, there's a lot that they don't know. And that's why we have problems in adoption of innovations, because people are conservative in their approach. It's human psychology. It has nothing to do with technology. It has nothing to do with the money. Well, it does have to do with the money, because if you're controlling the money and you're conservative, you're not going to take the risks. But they have hard problems and hard issues in understanding where risk and return is. Plus, the risk and return in 3 fields. ROI, which is return on investment. Environmental impacts, which is where we're talking about today, CO2 emissions. And social impacts. And I was raised to accomplish all 3. So our company is a triple bottom line approach, and that's how we're addressing it. To address CO2 emissions specifically, as I kind of told you about, we are able to take waste and convert it and sequester carbon from CO2 emissions. We also can do what's called air mining. If any of you are on this call and know what air mining is there's 4 fundamental basic technologies. There's variations on a theme of it. There's even combinations or combinatorials of it, where you can take CO2 and other GHG emissions out of the atmosphere and bury it in the ground. Well, we're doing something better than that. We're using those technologies, but we're putting our technology on the back end to turn it into products. And when I say products, I'm not talking about products like shoes, dresses, iPhones, computers, EVs. No, we're talking about products that actually double down. These are products that sequester more carbon and create more opportunities. So that's where I'm coming from. And I'm complete. Thanks.
Thank you for your excellent discussions. Actually, World Talent Economy Forum, with our open dialogues and the partnership with climate change divisions of Malaysian government, we are also developing around $60 billion public-private partnership ecosystems in Malaysia. We are developing resilient Malaysian concept. So startup, investment corporations, big construction companies, those who are actually supporting this climate change initiative, you can join in our open dialogue. 25 October, we are developing one of the largest public-private partnership dialogue with the help of Malaysian government in Dubai Expo, and our sponsor will be Petronas. And we are working very hard, and hopefully with all of your initiative and support, we can develop not only resilient Malaysia, we can develop different projects and different important aspects around Asia Pacific. So thank you. This is an excellent discussion. Because it's created a very important point, and I really want to give you thanks because you are bringing a lot of different points. So I want to go for the concluding remarks for today. And before that, I request all of our audience, I know that many policymakers, organization, think tank, government officials, corporations from Asia Pacific, academy, they are observing World Talent Economy Forum show. Please share our content as much as possible. I'm sure with the help of our collaborations, we will solve many problems. And that is the things. World Talent Economy Forums do not work for personal benefit. We are working for national developments. We are working with Malaysian government, Italian government, Japan government, even some point even India, Bangladesh. We are working because we want to develop the nations. We want to rebuild the new world. So all of your support will be very, very helpful for us. And with your help, maybe we can rebuild the new world. So Professor Sharidan, what's your concluding remarks? And I'm really happy after a long time you joined, and I can remember you really support me a lot. Even you also introduced actually Tando, and I some great speakers like David Smith, Professor Fred, and some other brilliant speakers. So Professor Sharidan.
All right, very good. Well, thank you again for the invitation. I guess in summary, and I really appreciate the in-depth analysis. Everybody had different perspectives of what we need. There's no one solution. I think we need to be broad. I'm biased, obviously, as an urban planner. And again, I only have 3 words. 1, cities, we will win or lose the battle in the cities because they are, on the demand side, the energy buyers. And I don't care what the oil producers think. If the cities decide not to buy, and they have the control, the industries could collapse. And so again, the power is in the cities as demand side, and they are closer to the citizens. They are not biased as much. So I think that is the key. And if I were to focus all my effort in the next 10 years, I would say get every city and town to shift to renewables as fast as you can and work with the local communities. And unfortunately, the oil producers and everybody will have to just follow the ride. Now, they can make the shift from oil, gas, to energy, technology, renewable, because they're energy companies, not oil companies. I had a client, Kodak, they thought they were into film. I told them go to digital. They said, no, we're film. They never listened, and it went under. And so that's going to happen to all the oil companies if they don't shift to energy with the cities now, because the cities are their customers. Secondly, elders, our elders, they are the scientists, and our professors, our educators, people who are knowledgeable. We need to listen to knowledge and science, both social as well as technical. And if we don't, we will be flying blind. Now, regarding the future, I agree. Exponential changes, and that's why I'm using virtual reality and AI. The kids are all gamers, all right? Most of them are gamers. And the biggest problem I see is most of the people 50 plus don't understand gaming at all. They don't understand what they're sitting on, VR and gaming. And what we can do is basically engage the young people. You can gamify everything on VR and AI. And you can make it fun and interesting and mainstream into STEAM education. That's what I would do for the future. And the good part is exponential technologies move at real time. So you can accelerate training, literally, from years to seconds or less, milliseconds. So I think in that sense, we have a big advantage, because if we harness the power of the kids as simulators, because we do that vector all the time, simulations. gaming simulations of the future. And you can do it as fast as you want with AI. It'd be easy to do, but we just aren't set up for it right now. So those are the three: cities, the elders who are knowledgeable, and then the kids who game it. And I think with that, we could change the world pretty quickly.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We need more of your support, more of your innovative idea and thought. And with your partnership and collaboration, hopefully World Talent Economy Forum will move to the next level. And this is our commitment. We want to serve for the nations. We are helping to develop different nations. And definitely we need some intellectual communities, some corporations and academia, even politicians for solving the problem. Thank you. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Discussion as always. Global warming, CO2, methane, all the others are elements that we have to address. As you mentioned, what you're doing in Malaysia, public-private partnerships are a great way to go and address these issues, because it's going to take all the stakeholders to be able to accurately be able to fix the problem. It's going to take education. Education, again, at all the stakeholder levels. We can be enlightened in leadership, but it takes the citizens, it takes the companies. It takes scientists and academia and in corporations to work to advance the issues. Monday night, I had dinner with some folks in the oil and gas industry who've come up with a non-polluting way to do fracking without water and other sources like that. Real interesting technology. It still is using petroleum as an end product going out, but it takes away 99% of the problems with that. So there's work being done across the board in others. You see others who are looking at materials to absorb and transfer into other usage the materials. I agree with Dan that there's many other uses for petrocarbons other than transportation, and we need to understand those. The movement towards electric vehicles, the movement towards hydrogen-based vehicles are all steps in the right direction. I think we have to go beyond electrical vehicles, because if I look at the total ecosystem of them, they contribute to the problem as well. And so we need to look at how to do this from an ecosystem, working through public-private partnerships to solve this on a global basis. And it is going to take a global approach. It's too easy to let our local issues sidestep the global views, and we need to think about this as a global issue. So Sharif, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor David Smith. Mr. James Seed, what's your concluding remarks?
Thank you, Sharif. You caught me in mid-note taking. I really appreciate the opportunity to be amongst the panel that you've assembled. Good job. Well done again. I really want to say, I don't want to quibble with Sheridan, because I agree with so much of what he said. But, you know, I would like the scientists and technologists not to think of themselves as elders. I would like to think of themselves as warriors. They are the braves out there. They must fight to be heard, because people are not paying attention to them. We had an administration very recently that poo-pooed them. And we have a nation that's divided about people, and it's a breakdown of trust. We no longer trust the scientists. We no longer trust the technologists. And this is an absurd way to go about living, go about policy making, go about decision making. We must take this fight on, head on, if you want science and technology to have its proper place in society. Because by its proper place, I don't mean dominant. I mean collaborative, cooperative, working with others. And this means that someone has to be the elder in the room that gets everybody has a chance to speak, but we decide by consensus a way of moving forward. And when it's coming to something like this, which is the environmental challenge that we face, is a crisis. It isn't a crisis that's going to come off in the future. It's a crisis that's happening now. The devastating storms, how great the energy is in these storms is a catastrophic event for the people that suffer them. And we have droughts where we didn't experience droughts like this before. We have rainfalls in Europe that they didn't experience before. People are shoveling the mud out of the basements of their homes, out of the first floors of their homes. We didn't see this type of thing before. So the denial is just, you just can't deny what's happening all across the world. That means it's a global phenomena, it's a climate phenomena, and it means that we're all in this together. And Sheridan, you mentioned Dante before. Well, Dante takes some concentration to read. So I think what we need is Dante as a graphic novel. Maybe that's the way we reach the youth of the world today, and get those brilliant pieces of wisdom that were difficult to disseminate. And this is our problem, is getting, you have this love of data. I love the love of data, but somehow we have to make it information, and not information used to persuade, but information used to inform, and to let people know the information is factual, to get them to understand that there's a difference between fact and opinion. And it's not who speaks the loudest, but who's speaking with a calm, cool, collected voice that is saying the truth. There is a difference between fiction and truth. And there is truth that is out there. But however much we know, we always have to remember we only know a little. And we have to be willing to challenge what we think we know. Because so many of us, myself included, so many of us can dig in our heels and think, well, I know that's not right, or I know that this is right. And turns out that some of our long-held, cherished beliefs that we grew up believing are not accurate. They do not map to reality. So we must be willing to challenge even those things that our ancestors told us were true, because they may have been true then and not true now. Things are changing. So we have to be adaptable as a species. It is not the one who is most fit that survives, it's the one that fits best. And we, in a changing environment, must adapt. We must fit into the environment, not make the environment fit us, because that has been our approach. And guess what? Mother Nature doesn't like to be told what to do. And she will inflict poisons and viruses and plagues upon us until we get the message. And it's high time we get the message. And then ask not what the planet can do for you, but what you can do for the planet. Thanks again, Sharif, for a terrific show.
Thank you. Mr. Raja, what's your concluding remarks?
You hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'd like to just very briefly tell about what Klaus Schwab said on I 4.0, the fourth industrial revolution. He said about the steam engine being the first revolution, but the reality check, it ended up with World War I. The second revolution on mass production and innovation, invention, scientific invention, that ended up with Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The third revolution was an amazing one. It is a digital technology, which came from IBM 41's, computers, but ended up in COVID-19 and the Afghanistan. So the fourth revolution that we are talking about, I'm emphasizing two: combine ROI with ROI, return on investment and return on intangible. Combine it. That is DCF and JAT, just in time. We got to do a lot of work on that. The fourth revolution has got an addendum, which is the societal changes. Put the focus on the societal changes. Bring ROI, bring the value system, which is the one which is going to bring a safety measure for the fourth industrial revolution to go forward. Otherwise, what happened in first, second, and third will be more disastrous for number four, which we are already seeing in CO2 emission. We are not able to control that. The societal changes is the underlying factor which I'd like to emphasize. Thank you.
Thank you. Professor Donald? Can you unmute, please? Professor Donald, can you unmute, please? So,
sorry, I'm sorry. I have to get going right now, but the only thing I just want to say is to remember that you can learn about this. The internet's there, and what the developing world is doing this at an uneven pace. So you look at Finland; they're able to. When I lived in Finland, I had a radiator in my house. Everyone in Oulu has heat that's produced by the waste products. When they incinerate the waste products, they use the heat. There's things going on all over the world, and and cities are man's greatest invention. We have to stop this whole idea of spreading ourselves out all over the place, because the only way that we're going to be able to really save money on transportation is to start centralizing it. And as I said again, we are our governments, and we need to pressure them to start doing the things that we need to do that are right. And thank you very much. I always love being on the show, but I have another meeting I've got to get ready for. So I'll see you guys. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Mr. Den, what's your concluding remarks?
Again, another great discussion, Sharif. I'm so glad that we have the developing world and the developed world getting so closely interconnected on these, because they really are going to have to be interconnected, comprehensive design level solutions like Buckminster Fuller talked about. I just want to say I'd love to present all of your ideas. I'm going to have a booth in Thousand Oaks here on October 17th at the Rotary Club Street Fair. It's going to be the 29th annual one. And I'm going to be, again, running for City Council in 2022. And I'm really looking forward to having all these ideas expressed. I urge you to check out the idea of a permaculture trail interconnection, which I call the Perma Trail, which I'm thinking could be another great worldwide moonshot kind of project where we have human rights and basic needs satisfied in a natural, nature-affirmed way. And yeah, let's take advantage of all the great blockchain kinds of technologies, distributed autonomous organizations. Get an Ethernet wallet so you can do POAP, which is a proof of attendance protocol. We can trade these digitally signed souvenirs for all kinds of interesting gamified applications. And thanks again. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Hardiksha.
Yeah, Sharif, first of all, thank you very much. I enjoyed the whole discussion. I learned a lot, and would definitely be interested in connecting with people. Now, one thing which I personally believe is the consumer has the biggest power in the world. What we need to do is educate the consumer to buy the right thing. So if we are able to educate that whether the product or the service is environment friendly, or whether it's a high GHG emission making or low GHG emission making, if those kind of awareness is spread across, and the diversion of the consumer the products or the service happens, automatically the manufacturers or the service providers will have to change themselves, including adopting new technologies and new processes which reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And that will be a much more sustainable and natural way of addressing these issues, so that the demand supply itself will make the balance of it, and then automatically the things will sustain forever. So that's what I personally believe, and I think I'm very much hopeful to it, and we're trying to do our bit there. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Marshall, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, I'm glad to be a part of this forum. Thank you for inviting me. Dan got me into it. So my concluding remarks are that time is the essence. People don't realize it. If you hook up with me on LinkedIn and you go to my corporate site, Advanced Resilient Technology, you'll see several pieces of information that are science-based. There is a video by Sir David King, which talks about why time is of the essence from a specific point of view. When I returned from Europe back at the beginning of the pandemic and got locked down here in the United States, before that, I was on a call with a scientist, a climate scientist. There's about 22 groups that have gotten funding for using NASA satellites to track emissions around the world, especially from the melting of glaciers and the snowpacks and things like that. But what I did is on January 20th, 2020, I got on a Zoom call with this scientist, Gary, and he showed me a 30-day sequence from December 20th, 2019 to the day that I got on with him, January 20th. And he showed a NASA satellite view of the Thwaites Glacier, which is over the South Pole. And that is emitting all sorts of emissions, CO2, but predominantly, the surprising one was methane. In 30 days, methane increased in that 30-day period 100x. That's methane. And we know what caused it. We know that CO2 emissions from mankind actually is causing this melting. But there's cascading results from it. And we have to take action now. And I encourage everyone, even if you're my competitor or you see yourselves as my competitor, I'll support you. I don't care. I think I have grandchildren. We have children's children. We got to save not the planet. The planet will be here. We got to save the people and the cultures and from ourselves and from our CO2 emissions and other emissions. So my concluding remarks is band together, get together, and take action.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. This is an excellent discussion, and thank you for all of your support for World Talent Economy Forum. And thank you for joining today's session. Bye-bye and take care.